See, last time we spoke about pop culture and theology. And I'm going to try to do it again today with a little bit more coherent examples. You got it, that's okay, it's fine. Okay, I can answer it. The reason being is that I like theology a lot, obviously, but I think we can't help but do theology. Maybe it's a bit radical, but I think theology really is like just a critical view of the divine. So in our case, it would be Christianity. Or it could be whatever your faith practices are. And I think everything you do has a sort of that critical element to it. Everything you think about, everything you say, when you're talking about really important things, I think in a sense you're doing theology, you just might not be aware of it. I think that we as a church, now I grew up really comfortable with like televangelists and other things like on the radio and on the television. This type of talk of like Christian eschatology doesn't really bother me as much. It's funny for me when I get to bring my wife to some of my grandparents' homes and she's like, it's on all the time, I don't understand what's going on. Which constantly inundated with the Bible and religious speak. I guess for me, it's something that I'm used to, and then growing up that way, I see it everywhere. And I'm also been particularly blessed. My dad's side of the family is Catholic. My mom's side is Protestant, and then both of them have a significant amount of Jehovah's Witnesses in their family. So there's sort of I grew up with kind of three competing theologies of Christianity in my household, just sort of battling back and forth. And I think it's pretty fascinating, and I'm going to share some of that with you today. Also, like I probably mentioned, some people don't want to do theology. They don't really want to question the word or question a sermon or question a psalm or whatever. They feel it's sacrilegious to do so. I don't think it's sacrilegious at all. I think it's kind of like, I'm a big fan of martial arts, and you have like this ancient martial arts that started 1,200 years ago or whatever in some small village in India. But then you want to think, well, how does that really apply to today? Like how do you go from, say, someone doing kung fu to like Mike Tyson, whatever, right? People do that on ESPN all the time, and that's sort of a sense like a sport theology, if you get my drift. That's why I think it's essential that like every time you see or hear, you think about it, you automatically do it anyways. It processes it in your mind. I think that's kind of like what we're doing now. And I think that like culture in particular is a really great place to look for theology. It's kind of in plain sight. It allows you to engage an audience that's kind of wider than what you are. Like when I was growing up against some of those televangelists, were kind of just talking to people. Yeah, they weren't talking to people they were talking to people outside of their church, but they're kind of still talking to, in a sense, the converted or the soon to be converted, right? They didn't really necessarily care about a wider audience. And quite frequently, something that sort of turned me off, they would say things like, if you're not watching me or if you're not in my church right now, you're not saved, or whatever, right? Which I thought was ridiculous, because what if you were a normal viewer of that channel and you just happen to be out that day, right? Stuff like that doesn't quite make any sense. But I think that type of mentality have turned off people to our message. I think that's one reason why we've seen a lot of people say that they're not affiliated with the church or a church or with a religion. And I think as a result, all that complicated ideology, all those thoughts that people have about like what happens to us when we die, what happens to us when we're born, how do we interact with each other, all that stuff kind of gets pushed to pop culture when it used to be sort of done here in the pews. So yeah, I think some of this stuff might get complicated, but I'm going to try to distill a couple points down for you today. So I'm going to talk about some things that I've watched recently, things that you guys can watch too. I hope you guys see the same things that I've seen, and I think also we can maybe kind of be on the same page for it. It shouldn't be too complicated. Recently, I would say since 9/11, there's been a lot of sort of pop culture about the apocalypse. Now, true, there's also been similar works after World War I, World War II. What was Kurt Vonnegut's books? I was thinking the Korea War. Yeah, so this is not like new, but what's different now is that people are spending billions of dollars to create movies and websites and TV shows and video games all about these subjects. And they used to sort of hide this. Maybe this thing took place on another planet. Star Trek is a big example. You have these really big things happening in Star Trek, but it takes place somewhere else, and you might not be able to, you can just sort of ignore that. Most recently, though, the most recent Marvel Universe movies that have made, I think, about $3 billion, $4 billion total, those two movies don't do a good job of hiding their eschatology. Don't do a good job of hiding how they are internalizing messages about the resurrection and the rapture. This is also probably weirdly influenced by Japanese pulp culture, because after World War II and after the bombing of Hiroshima, they have a lot of their culture overall has been geared towards, like, why do we fight? What should we do about war? Everything from, you may have seen, from like Godzilla to Sailor Moon to some of the samurai movies kind of have scenes in them that mimic the atomic bomb being dropped on them. It might not be dropped on Tokyo again or whatever, but they sort of have that type of destruction, and then the characters deal with that. In some cases, like Godzilla, it might be that a Godzilla creature comes from the seas to protect Japan from that happening again. So in these two movies I'm talking about are called Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. Now, I hope you've seen Infinity War, because that came out last year. I'm going to spoil it a little bit for you. I will try my best not to spoil Avengers Endgame, but it's been in movie theaters for a few months now, so you should have seen it. In the Marvel Universe, they have quote-unquote gods, but they use the term kind of loosely, much the same way the old Greek heroes would use the term gods or deities. Basically, in the Marvel Universe, they sort of rationalize it as these are people with immense power, or maybe such a grasp of science that what they do might seem like magic, but it's actually just sort of really high-level science and mathematics, right? They try not to be too blasphemous, but they freely call these people gods. During their stories, what they do is they have an arc similar to what Jesus had. The heroes do have to figure out how to be a savior, how to give to a community. Usually they have something of self-interest or some sort of selfish desire that they have to either overcome or somehow harmonize with the community. And I think they do a pretty good job of sort of neatly hiding general Christian dogma. There will be things where someone has to feed a family, and they do some kind of a miracle to figure out how to feed them, how to clothe people. They'll do things like someone will touch somebody's garment, but it'll be like a little kid. It won't be a woman, and he'll turn to their little kid and sort of thank them and raise them up. Similar scenes to what Jesus did in the Gospels. Actually, here's how one Christian blog that I want to turn your attention to, called Heavenly Perspectives, puts it. The MCU, or the Marvel Cinematic Universe, it's been around for about 10 years. During the last 10 years, all of the Marvel movies have been connected together in one way. Every movie has included a little piece of an overarching story, and all those points climax in the movie Avengers Endgame. The villain of the movie, an alien named Thanos, which is the Greek word for death, has been lurking in the background since the first Avengers movie in 2012. He's the baddest of the bad guys in the Marvel Universe. His goal in Infinity War is to eliminate half the population of the universe because he thinks it's too crowded. In other words, a rapture. To achieve his goals, he must collect these Infinity Stones. Each stone gives him immense power. And by bringing the stones together, he possesses an infinite amount of power. He becomes an omnipresent God. Having collected the stones, his power would be so great that the simple snap of his fingers, he could achieve his goal of eliminating half the universe. So you have a superpowered alien being, comes down from the skies to Earth to get something that he needs to be infinitely powerful. Once he has what he needs, he snaps his fingers and eliminates half the people in the universe, which also means half the people on Earth. And I think also half the animals, so half the birds, half the whales, half everything that's living. Half of the Earth's populations instantly disappear into nothing, which causes all kinds of chaos, including car, helicopter, airplane crashes, etc. This infinitely powerful alien then returns to his home and does nothing more to the Earth. Also, this villain Thanos is his minions. They refer to them as what they're doing as a blessing. So every person that they are eliminating, they're blessing the person who's eliminated, and they're blessing the Earth that's left behind. So that's what I kind of like about this blog's particular perspective. These movies show the chaos and sorrow that happens after the rapture, And they also show the real consequences of what happens when half of all living beings are gone. And I think also what these movies show, they talk about what happens to life, what happens to people's faith in this particular instance. Now, what I don't like about this particular blog commentary is that they dismiss some of the other prophetic message in these movies. What they tend to focus on is that, well, in our Bible it says that this will happen in the Middle East, and it will happen from this particular type of clashes. And actually, Martin has mentioned this before in some of his earlier sermons, which kind of actually sparked my thinking about this, about people who do their best to facilitate the rapture, like that person who's growing a set of cows that would have a certain mark that is mentioned in the Bible, that therefore would bring about the rapture, things like that. Or people who are trying to build a temple and trying to figure out the exact dimensions of that temple in Jerusalem and where exactly the coordinates should be, basically only so that they can facilitate a rapture, right? And now I think that some of these blogs are saying, oh, well, like, don't think too hard about this. Yeah, there's some Christian elements to it, but don't think too hard about this movie. And I say that we should think about this movie, because I think what this movie is asking us, is this what we really want? Is this type of rapture, this type of war, is this what we really are aiming for? And perhaps are there other things that we can do, and other things that our text tells us to do? I chose the two passages today because when I Googled Christian eschatology, when I Googled the rapture and Armageddon, so things that you guys can do too, these are the two passages that came up most frequently. And then these images you'll see directly in the movie. You'll see people eating or in a farm, and you'll see one person talking to another person, and that person just disappears. Very, very similar to what we have here. And there are a couple of mentions about like Noah's flood and things like that, sort of in the background. But I think if you watch that movie and also you read this passage, you see that they really are pressing the button of this is what the rapture is going to look like. And they're doing it in some cases in 3D, on IMAX. I mean, this is really fascinating at how much of our theology is in this movie. And so I look at this and I think, what other stuff could we be doing to avoid this rapture? And interestingly enough, in the movies, and here's in the last movie, and I'm going to try my best not to spoil it, they actually give us a couple choices. So the bad guy, Thanos, he does his rapture. He tries to limit it to, he tries to leave good people in the world, even though he's just killed a whole bunch of people, even though you see him fighting with the good guys. He tries to leave the world better than he does, and then he goes home, and then he then destroys his Infinity Stones so that no one else will have this power to do it again. And interestingly enough, that's sort of seen as a good thing. And if you ever seen online for the past year or so, people have been asking, is this a good thing? Maybe this is not such a bad thing. Maybe we should have a war that culls 50% of the population. There's also other suggestions too. One of the heroes gets the power via some complicated reasoning that I would like for you to see yourself. He gets the power of the Infinity Stones, and then he reverses the rapture. And then there's a discussion about if that was a good thing. Because now it's been years since people have been missing, and are things getting better or are things getting worse? Maybe this is something that we shouldn't overdo or redo. Another person suggests, well, maybe we should get this infinity power and then only get rid of bad people, only get rid of evil people, only get rid of Thanos. Thanos hears about this and he gets so mad that people would reject his blessing, and I forget the name of the god that he worships, but he gets so mad at this rejection that he thinks, okay, we're just going to kill everybody, or 100% of the people, which is something I've been noticing in some of the online communities about people warning about, like, this war in the Middle East, when is it going to happen? And it's, people get so frustrated, so angry that people aren't joining their side. They're like, well, we'll just get rid of all of them. So it's really interesting how this movie is trying to capture like the multifaceted arguments about the rapture, about Armageddon. There's also a couple other choices too. One person decides that maybe we can just sort of bring everybody back and then make it so that there's never a rapture ever again. And another person takes that power and then sort of hides with it, runs with it. And then they speak about this character as sort of like another Jesus character, another person. This this particular hero will come back again, and then when he comes back, everything will be fixed. And then, of course, later on, he does come back, and he doesn't fix anything. He just says, hi, how are you doing? And he just makes his local community comfortable. Which, again, I think is a commentary on what will happen if Jesus comes. Will Jesus come back and take all this power that he took away with him when he died, when he went away? Will he come back? Will he kill our enemies? Will he just save everybody else? And in the ending of this movie, a character doesn't do that. He just says hi, gives them a hug, and walks out. I also should mention they do kind of their own little Pentecost moment where there's like 40 or so characters together. They don't exactly have like flames on top of their head, but it's really reminiscent of when people got together right after Jesus came back. So there are other movies too, and other books and TV series that they're talking about it. One more in particular that I want to mention because I'm trying to get my wife into it is this series called Good Omens on Amazon. What Good Omens is about two characters. One, the demon, who is supposed to be the actual snake in the Garden of Eden, and one, an angel, who's supposed to be the actual sword that protected the Garden of Eden. They become friends after Adam and Eve get kicked out of the garden. And over the millennia, they start to realize that actually life on earth is pretty good. So given their place and primacy in what the authors are suggesting in the story, you would think that they'd be for Armageddon. But actually, much of their remaining time on earth is trying to make sure that Armageddon never happens. So it goes from whatever the Garden of Eden happened to 2018, 2019, and you see them doing modern things and trying their best to be like, who would give up? Why would we have a war when we have cell phone coverage? Or why would we have a war when this bottle of wine from France is so fantastic? And so in their point of view, the authors are suggesting that life itself is worth living, and you have these biblical characters who are able to cite back biblical sources to other people who want this war. Like you have other angels and other devils who really want to fight, mostly because that they feel that their existence is predicated on this big war, which I think is also commentary on religious fundamentalists in today, that people whose existence they feel is really based on the conflict between each other and other religions. I think it's interesting too that because these authors and these directors can approach these characters as characters, they really can get into their motivations. They really can look at what causes someone to give their life for a community, to try to start the rapture or whatever. And I think that they're doing things that we are afraid to do often in our church because we don't want to be sacrilegious to it. So I just want to thank you for your time here today. I have some other stuff if you want to find. I could show you some of the things that have been printed out if you want to see what it looks like. And I appreciate you guys having me here. Have a good day. Thank you.